Hi.
Hello. Hi, how may I address you? Do I call you Denzel?
Yes, please.
All right. All right, welcome to the workshop. We'll begin at 7 o'clock sharp. In the meantime, can I know what you intend to achieve from this workshop?
Learn how to answer the questions.
All right. Denzel, are you taking exams?
Yes.
Which level is that?
Primary 6.
Okay, P6. Which school are you from?
Nghi
All right, over in Tampines, yeah?
No, in Marine Parade.
Oh yeah, okay, correct. You are bonded by all the, as in surrounded by all the HDB flats.
Yeah.
Correct? Yes, I remember now. Because Nia Secondary School is in Tampines. I got confused. Right. How do you do for your structured questions usually, Denzel?
I think it's quite okay. You just have to memorize the answers.
All right. Okay, perhaps memorizing the answers are not the way to go. I'll share some parts later. Right, this workshop is also meant for more meant for parents because to understand the idea behind how questions are set and things like that. Okay, but nonetheless, you're here to stay on. I'll just try to. All right. All right, welcome. The rest of you. We'll start at 7 o'clock. In the meantime, I was just asking Denzel, what does everyone hope to achieve by attending this particular workshop to demystify structured questions, as in the booklet B type of questions for primary science? So you can use the chat, you can just go over the chat and let me know perhaps what is or are your objectives of attending this evening's workshop. Right, there is a question posted online from Facebook. Is algae a plant or animal? Does anyone know the answer to that? Yes, thank you, Denzel. It is a plant. Why do you say that it is a plant? Right, it is indeed a plant, and the reference to the food web is not necessary. Yes, thank you, Sanuk Shah. Sorry if I pronounce your names incorrectly. Yes, the reference to food web is not necessary because an algae is definitely a plant. Whether it is part of the food chain or the food web does not matter, so long as it contains chlorophyll, the organism is a plant. But such questions are not asked generally at PSLE because such information will disadvantage pupils who do not know what algae is. So at PSLE, the questions will be very fair. If it is a plant, it will identify it as a plant. So we just have to relate the idea that this organism is a food producer, and that is good enough. So thank you, Sanuk Shah, as well as Denzel, for your answers. Okay, 1 minute to go, and then we will start. Right, do you mind just going to the chat and just letting me know if you are a parent or a child taking exams? Because how I speak will be a little bit different, how I will, because the slides, all right, thank you, Sanuk Shah. What about, all right, thank you, Denzel. All right, so you're attending this with your parents, which is good, because the angle of my slides are more towards the adults, but nonetheless not a problem. Okay, there are more than that. Thank you. I'm not able to see everyone. All right. All right, it's past 7 and let us start. I'm not too sure, or rather our admin is also not too sure how many people are attending this workshop. We'll just begin, all right? Good to see you, Denzel. Hello. All right, so today's workshop is on demystifying structured questions. Now, well, it is often a mystery because we don't know what MOE wants to test. A lot of us do not know that. Although we have access to the past year papers and all that, sometimes we don't know how they're marked, what is the requirements. So hopefully I'll be able to shed some light on that. All right, so these are the workshop objectives. First up, you want to be aware of what is being tested at PSLE. I'm not too sure if anyone here is not at P6 level, if you are a child, but nonetheless, the information is also relevant, even if you're P3 to P5, okay? Much of these will be cascaded, as in it will flow down towards you. All right, so we want to understand what the common problems we face, students face, be familiar with some techniques, Now, it's only 1 hour. I cannot share the whole array of techniques, but I'll just share some tips. And then if you are parents with us, perhaps you could help to assess your child's answer, as opposed to just looking at the answer key and wondering why your child didn't get the full marks for a particular question. Because most often than not, what we have written, or if you're a child, if you're a pupil, what you have written will be totally different from the school's answer key, right? Okay. Now, this is the syllabus requirement from MOE. Yeah? So we have, over the years, moved more and more from knowledge to understanding to conceptual application. And then interwoven within all these requirements will be the skills, processes, ethics, and attitudes. There are a lot of assessment books out there in a popular bookstore or in other bookstores to train you or teach you process skills. So all the process skills are written there. A bit too much actually. I'll just give very simple illustration of what all these skills are. Okay, let's take for example the life cycle of a frog. Okay, frog is something that you need to know. You've learned this in P3, some of you in P4. Now the knowledge part, the example of something that you need to know, that the young of the frog does not look like the adult, or perhaps the young lives in the water, the adult lives on land. These are the knowledge aspect. Example of something that you need to understand. Okay, the young frog has different attributes or different characteristics to help it survive in a different surrounding. Likewise for the adult, to apply that level of understanding, how does living in different environments, one in the water, one in the land, how is it advantageous for the frog's long-term survival? Okay, and of course we know that the prerogative or the aim of all animals is to continue its species. Example of skills and processes. Now, you're required to make comparisons between the life cycle of a frog and the life cycle of another animal like a cockroach. Make inferences. Do the young look like the adult? Do they feed on the same thing, etc. Okay, this is also integrated. Right? What is ethics and attitudes? For instance, if you are in an area where you need to control the population of frog because there's an outbreak, they are swarming the whole city, for instance, what kind of, how can you propose to control the frog population? Of course, if you want to care for the frogs, you cannot just outright poison them because you are doing a lot of harm, not just to the frogs, but to the environment as well. So ethics come in. Ethics means doing things the right way. Okay, boys and girls, if you are a pupil. So you have to show concern for the animals as well as for the environment. So that is the attitude. Right, what's the difference between PSLE and school? The different kinds of assessments. All right, at PSLE, the purpose is to test pupils for understanding. So if a pupil is not able to express himself, okay, I use the masculine term himself to refer to both boys and girls. Pupil is not able to express himself, he will not be disadvantaged if he can draw a diagram and annotate on the diagram. If he can show that he understands what the question is asking him, then he has a high chance of getting the marks, right? But in schools, it is a little bit different because in schools, the goal is to teach pupils and to train pupils. So even if you make a spelling mistake and all that, most likely your teachers are going to penalize you just to make sure that you learn the right thing. Now, for us, like a private enrichment center, we also tend to sway towards the teaching and training of pupils rather than to be lenient in that sense to just test students for understanding, right? All for different purposes. Okay, time frame as well as clarity in testing objective. What I'm talking about that this is in schools, teachers often it's not their fault. The main roles of teachers is to teach and to manage pupils, and that will have consumed a lot of their energy. Okay, and then sometimes they have to set papers, so they reverse engineer the paper. So if I'm supposed to set, say, a question on water cycle, I flip through some books and look at something that's suitable and then pull it, adapt it a little for my exam paper. And then from there, I come out with what are the concepts being tested for this question. So at PSLE it's a little bit different because they have a longer time to set the national papers. So they will probably outline the objectives. I want to test this about the water cycle. So I will find a question or think of a question that will test this concept. It's different. Contents and question type, sometimes the schools do test a little bit more, whereas PSLE is very focused. Now, variances in suggested answers, what I'm referring to here is, why is it sometimes that when you have the same question, at P5 you've got full marks, but P6 you wrote the same answer to the same question, you didn't get the full mark. All right, so there's that little bit of variance. So it depends on the answer key being set at that point in time. Now, answer keys and all that is not something that we want to discuss because MOE actually don't release the answers. They only release the questions. So the answers are up to us as well as the publishers that print the PSLE books, the interpretation of the answers, okay? Now, if you want to know strictly what the learning outcomes are, you can always go search MOE Primary Science Syllabus, and then there's this PDF document that you can download. So refer to pages 20 to 55. It will tell you exactly what is not required. Okay, so everything is spelled out very clearly there. Sometimes what is not required is often it is tested in schools, but at MOE, all these are extra test requirement. Tests will be sieved out. They are no longer there. All right. Now, if I were to analyze the past year's PSLE papers, I can break them down by topics, and I can break them down by question types. Okay. This is not recommended. Okay, breaking down, looking through the PSLE papers and break them down by topics is no good because at primary school level, the syllabus content is already very little. So we don't try to spot questions anymore. For example, on the topic of light, there's only that many things. Light travels in straight line, it can be blocked, shadows are formed, shadows can change shape, and then different materials allow different degree of light to pass through them. So that's all about light energy. And then spend weeks exploring these few concepts. So there is no need to try to spot questions or by the topics at all. Just learn everything because it's very little. But breaking down by question type is good because at least you are aware of what is being tested and how some questions are being asked. Okay. Now, breaking down by question types, I've done an analysis. Okay, I started from 2018 because 2018 is when the 44 marks booklet B format started. Before that, it was 40 marks. Of course, I do have my analysis before then also. not very different from this, okay? All right, what I want to highlight is in the question type, what is mentioned, okay, let me bring out my, okay, stating hypothesis was something new that was introduced in 2020, which was last year. So the reason why it has very low percentage, it is because that's a reason, right? Because it was tested for the first time. Right, so generally as you go down the table, it increases in difficulty level. Now, sometimes it might be a little bit, for example, the first one says identify state name is purely recall. Sometimes it includes some definition. Second one, identify state with some interpretation of data required. Okay, now I'll just give examples later. But I just want you to know that identifying question types is not so straightforward. It's not just looking at the question and picking up the word, the first word of the question, identify, state, or name. Sometimes they might say identify or state, but it requires a certain degree of explanation. All right, so I will classify that differently. So it's not just about picking up the verbs. It's about looking at the question and looking at what the questions require. Right, relationship, like how does amount of water affect the growth of plant? Things like that. It seems to have a very low percentage because some of the relationship questions are actually disguised and they're parked under explanation. All right, I'll just give examples later. All right, what you need to know, usually I don't share this with pupils until after the prelims. I'm referring to primary 6 pupils, because a lot of schools are testing these kind of questions. So problem comes like when I was teaching my own kids, sometimes I don't test them on certain things, and then they're tested in school and then they lose their marks. All right. So example, okay, why did Andrew repeat the experiment 3 times? Right, I'm using Andrew because he's not present today. How did repeating the experiment 3 times help Andrew to obtain more reliable results? Now, such questions are often asked in school papers, even in G papers. I've seen 1 or 2. Now, in general, the testing criteria at PSLE has moved away from memorizing. So Denzel, earlier you mentioned that you need to memorize certain answers. Now, that one is more for 2 other topics, okay? Water cycle is one of them. Now, you don't memorize and you don't regurgitate. Regurgitate means vomit out answers. Sometimes if they allow memorizing of answers, sometimes pupils can get the marks without even understanding what the question is all about. Okay, why did Andrew repeat the experiment 3 times? He wanted to get more reliable results. Now, anyone can just repeat that, state that information, or give the answer without actually understanding what reliable means. Okay, so they have taken away all these kind of questions. State the aim of Andrew's experiments, often asked in school papers, and even at TCher Online, we do ask questions like that because the schools ask them. So we have no choice. We need to train our pupils to manage questions like that. Now, for experimental aims, you need to know that it can be very difficult to mark. Okay, we don't know how children think. I'm talking to the adults here. Example is if I have a setup with 3 pots of similar plants and the water level, amount of water I give daily, 100 ml to 300 ml. Now, so what is the aim of this experiment? Now, a child can state something like to find out how much water it takes to drown a plant. Now, it is actually not wrong. it is correct. So how do assessors or markers ascertain whether this answer is correct? So it's a little bit difficult. So for that reason, it is not really asked at PSLE. Okay. All right. The first question type: identify, state, recall. Now I'm using the last 3 years PSLE examples just to stay a little bit more updated. But just to know that last year's PSLE is a little bit skewed. 2020 did not include interactions within the environments. Actually, that topic is very, very important. It connects all the other topics, almost all the other topics that the pupils have learned from P3 all the way to P6. Okay. Now, identify system. So we know circulatory system, the function of the system. So this is half mark each. You can look at the mark allocation. Name why. So it is very simple, just a one-word answer, the heart. Other than why, name another two parts. So this is strictly very recall, and recall questions like that take up about 10% of the paper. So this 10% is quite a giveaway. Pupils just have to know the stuff well. Okay. Now, identify, state, and name with certain degree of interpretation. For example, let's look at this first one. State one advantage of the method of dispersal used by F. Now, so I need the pupil has to look at this picture of F and ascertain its method of dispersal. Is it by wind, water, animals, or by splitting? All right, so suggested answer does not need help from agents. Agents include water, wind, or animals. That means this plant is able to disperse its seeds on its own without external help. Right? Because it doesn't say that the advantage has to be what advantage it has over the other methods of dispersal, there is no need to make any comparison. So you can state general answers such as, so that the seeds do not overcrowd, they do not compete for the 4 elements: sunlight, water, nutrients, and space. Okay. Now, second one, state how many months after the introduction of substance S did the number of births of bird P start decrease. Now, these questions are not complete. They're just part of the, I'm just showing the question without the span. That means the prior information that was given. So this one is just looking at the graph, interpreting and pulling out the information, which is 6 months. Okay, hypothesis was something new that was first tested last year. So this kind of stumped a few pupils because pupils generally do not know what a hypothesis means. Okay. So hypothesis, oops, okay, sorry, it's spelled wrongly. It is not a conclusion, so it is neither correct nor incorrect. You just have to state the any relationship that you think works. Okay, example. All right, the shirt with the smell of an infected child will affect more mosquitoes. You can even write less or fewer mosquitoes, or does not affect the number of mosquitoes. All 3 answers are acceptable. As I said, hypothesis forms the basis of carrying out an experiment. So there's no correct or wrong hypothesis. Simply, you just simply have to identify the correct variables. All right, setting a relationship with interpretation. Okay, we have moved on to relationship questions now. Now, as I mentioned earlier, why is it so few? Only 3% of the questions are on relationships. For example, describe how substance N affected the number of times bees visited both containers from day 1 to day 2. So if you look at this, there are 2 trends, the green one going down and the blue blue graph going upwards. So there are two relationships. It's always best to use two separate statements. So in R, the number of B's visits decreased from day 1 to day 10, and in S, the number of B visits increased, right, over the same period. Now, next type of question or next question type will be the draw or complete the diagram, and this forms about 6%. And these kind of questions are quite specific to Web of Life and electrical system. All right, so far they have not asked pupils to draw shadows, draw light rays, although it's tested in school. I'm not too sure whether it's because of the difficulty in marking or what. But Web of Life and electrical system tested quite frequently, all right? So first example, draw a circuit to correct the mistakes. Now, you don't know what's the actual question, but just to note, for electrical systems, you need to analyze, first of all, whether you need to draw a series of parallel arrangement. And when you draw the wires, you're not supposed to leave any gaps. That means everything must be connected. So once, for example, if I draw a wire that does not touch the light bulb, goes very close to the light bulb without touching it, so that is a penalty because it is considered an open circuit when there's no connection, right? So leave no gaps. Second one, draw foot web to show the foot relationship given the information in the table. Now, this is what you need to know, or what pupils have to know. The direction of arrow shows the energy transfer. After a while, some pupils get confused because they think that the direction of arrow means eating. So if, for example, X eats W, so X, the arrow goes from X to W. This is a misconception. It is incorrect because if X eats W, W transfers energy to X. So the arrow should point from W to X. Okay, so it is always about energy transfer. It's not about eating. A very common error. All right, this forms a very large percentage, almost a quarter. Explain and give a reason. Now, very quick chat. What's the difference between explain and give a reason? Anyone? All right. Right, let's use a chat. Or you can just unmute yourself and speak if you wish to. What's the difference between explain and give a reason? Right, but while you're talking, it'll be good because I can take a short break. Anyone? Okay, my eye is on the chats, just like when I'm conducting lessons, my eye is always, one eye is on the chat, the other eye is on the screen. All right. Okay, so now, generally when, okay, thank you, Christiana. Yes, you're giving the answer. Yes, reduction of friction with wheels. Yes, that is one of the answers. Now, generally when they ask you to give a reason, there are more than one reason. So you just have to give one reason. You cannot give more than one. If you give more than one, they'll just look at the first one that you have given, right? They cannot mark everything. It's not fair to the rest because the rest who have given one reason and they've given three reasons. Yeah. Right. So a lot of possible explanation. The first one is the most viable one from my perspective. There was less friction compared to the friction between the mass and the track, all right? The mass being the block of whatever it is, wood or whatever material. Now, rolling friction, if you look at the PDF document from MOE, rolling friction is not included. So that's why my first statement doesn't really talk about how the wheels roll and all that, okay? For things that roll, actually friction is good. You want friction, otherwise the wheels will be just sliding, okay? Now, friction is generally about sliding. So I can also say there's no friction between the mass and the track, or the wheels on the wagon reduce friction, just like what Christiana mentioned. All right, thank you. Likewise. KV and Gillen, thank you for your answer. Now, I can also explain this using not forces, but energy conversion, right? Less kinetic energy converted to heat energy as the wheel decreased friction. So the train had more kinetic energy to move more quickly. So many ways to answer this question. I just have to use one reason. Now, this is what I call the disguised relationship question. That's why just now when you saw the relationship question types, there are only 3% because a lot of them are parked under here, under explanation or giving a reason. So I use relationships between different variables to explain certain things, okay? Now, let's look at this question. As Caden pushed magnet P towards magnet Q, he found that it became more difficult, right? So explain why. So I make use of a relationship structure. As the distance between the magnets decreased, the magnetic force of repulsion or increased, I can say the magnets repelled each other more strongly. All right, as I said, these are indirect relationship questions because the phrase, what is the relationship between this and that, is not, it is missing. But you have to make use of a relationship to answer, to explain this phenomenon, this observation. Next one, explain using CER. CER is the very highest level of explanation. All right, so it requires a lot of analysis, requires a lot of pulling out information and recall of concepts. Okay, let's look at this example. Polar bears are mammals which obtain food from the sea. They rest on ice between their humps in the water. Due to global warming, the ice on the surface of seawater decreases in size. We can look at the diagram there. Increasing temperature, smaller ice blocks floating on the water. So based on the information provided, suggests how global warming affects the survival of polar bears, and explain your answer. Now, before we attempt this question, I just want to briefly talk about what CER means. All right, this is a method not used just in Singapore. It is used internationally to explain a scientific observation. All right, so according to this method, it defines or it states that a correct explanation, a correct scientific explanation will include all these elements. The first one is a claim. For example, okay, a claim is a statement that answers the question directly. Like, for example, which material is the most suitable for this purpose? And you say material P is the most suitable. And then evidence requires you to go back to the question. You have to look for the question stem, read the question stem, look for graphs, look for tables, sometimes even diagrams. And then you have to pull out this evidence and interpret the results, okay? Finally, reasoning, meaning that you have to make use of what you have identified as the evidence to support your claim, to explain why, for example, material P is the most suitable. And this one requires you to recall some scientific concepts as well. Okay, so let's go back to this. Now, I need to share this, so I backtrack a little bit, because a lot of pupils tend to miss out on the evidence aspect. So they move from the claim, that material P is the most suitable, and then they go straight to the reasoning. It is the best conductor of heat, for example, okay? And will conduct heat the most quickly from the hot water to the colder surroundings. So they totally skip the evidence part. So the evidence could have been a graph showing that the liquid lost heat the most quickly. So that one marks are lost often without interpretation of the evidence. Okay, so let's look at what the CR means for this particular question. Okay, since you don't write CER, this is just invisible. So I'm using the first person reference because I understand a number of you are pupils. So parents, you don't mind if I use you as referring to you as a child, okay? Now, the claim. See, the claim answers the question directly. How will it affect the survival of polar bears? More polar bears will die, or they can say the population will decrease. Evidence, there's no table, there's no graph. I can only look at the smaller ice blocks. Right? So this is my evidence. The smaller pieces of ice cannot support the polar bear, or I can also state evidence as temperature increases. So I should have mentioned the other one. As temperature increases, the pieces of the ice become, or the ice decreases in size. Okay, so I should have stated it in the form of relationship. So my evidence, if you are recording this, you can just use a relationship to talk the relationship between increasing temperature and the size of ice. Okay, so you can replace this part. So I just did this today, so didn't have time to check. And the reasoning part will be using the evidence of the smaller pieces of ice to explain why polar bears will die, more polar bears will die. So they will have less resting places and have less energy to hunt. Now, resting places is taken from the top, from when they rest on the ice between their hunts. And this less energy part is something of a daily experience. All of us know or are expected to know that when we rest, we replenish our energy level, right? It's not a concept that is taught outright, but it's something that we need to know or understand from our daily experiences. More rest means more energy. Less rest means less energy. Okay. The next question type will be to explain or describe processes, and some of them are very procedural. This kind of description will be relevant only to electrical system and water cycle. All right, let's look at this example. Okay, it's about 12%, quite a high percentage. And if you look at the past year papers, you should know that electricity and water cycle are asked every year in booklet B. Sometimes 2 questions on electricity also might appear. Okay, so Sunny set up this electrical doorbell as shown. When the switch is closed, the iron hammer swings about fixed point N to strike the bell, producing a ding sound. When the switch is open, the iron hammer swings back to strike plate N, producing a dong sound, sorry. So to explain how a ding sound is produced when the switch is closed. Now, this one requires, although it's only 1 mark, it requires a very structural, methodical way, step-by-step way to explain what happens from one part to another part of the circuit, okay? Step-by-step description is required, and it's best to use separate phrases or sentences. Now, in science, you don't have to write complete sentences. By now, I hope you should. Everyone knows. And you also need to check for the inclusion of keywords. Okay, example. When the switch is closed, electricity flows through the wire coils around the iron cylinder. So the cylinder becomes a magnet or electromagnet, attracts the hammer, and the hammer moves about point M to strike the bell. So you see step-by-step description using separate sentences. Okay, I use sentences, but a pupil can just use short phrases, which is also acceptable. And sometimes the circuit continues in a certain cycle. For example, if I have a ball rolling and then the circuit keeps on connecting, disconnecting, connecting, and I just need to complete explanation for one cycle and stop there. I don't have to repeat the whole from step 1 all the way to say step 3 again. Okay. All right. The next one is on electrical water cycles. This is 2018 question. A worker used a truck to deliver blocks of ice. A mist was seen when ice was taken out of the truck, and explain how this mist was formed. So all of us who have done water cycle questions before know that a lot of keywords are required. So if I want to mention evaporation, I need to mention a heat gain. Likewise, for condensation, I need to mention a heat loss. And then condensation usually involves a cooler surface. But this one, cooler surface does not apply because there's no surface here. Right, so suggested answer, water vapor from the surrounding air came into contact with the colder air from the truck. This is necessary because it involves the concept of heat traveling from the warmer water vapor to the colder air from the truck. Okay, so the water vapor lost heat and condensed to form water droplets. And these form the white mists. Okay. So again, it's a very step-by-step description of what has taken place, and you need to check for the inclusion of keywords. Water vapor, what's the initial product? What is the process? And whether it's a heat gain or heat loss? And what is the final outcome from water vapor to water droplets? All right, suggest. Very high percentage. Okay, suggest questions generally differentiates between the very extremely good pupil, the good pupils, and the average pupil. Okay, so these are the questions that will allow pupils to get their L1s, L2s, now it's all Ls. 16.1%, it is fairly high. Now, in general, any question that asks you has this word suggest, the answer is not taken from information that is within the question. So what do you have to do? You have to recall what you have learned, or pupils have to recall scientific concepts from the topics they've learned in similar experimental setup through their hand-on experiences or experiments, as well as their daily experiences. Okay, so these are things that they have to think a little bit out of the box, as I would say. Now, it cannot be a concept that someone happened to chance upon when reading a science article, a science journal, watching a YouTube video on things. Now, the whole idea is that I'm talking about PSLE. Yeah? PSLE will not disadvantage pupils who do not have access to certain resources. So pupils who perhaps don't subscribe to magazines, they will not be disadvantaged. So everything that they have learned, in other words, when your pupils are asked to suggest an answer, it has to be something that the pupil has learned before. You just have to search through his memory and pull out the relevant information. All right. Okay, example here, last year's question. John conducted an experiment to find out if the amount of wind affected distance moved by seed E. So seed E is dispersed by wind. He repeated the experiment 5 times with all factors kept the same except one. So suggests 2 possible ways of changing or varying this factor. So ask in a very different way. So suggest 2 possible ways. So pupils will have to think, hey, or they have to know what this method of dispersal is and what is the factor that was changed. So wind speed. So sometimes a little bit of common sense is also required. How do I change the wind speed on a fan? So this is daily experiences. Everyone should know that the fan has a speed control, right? So the first possible way is to change the speed of the fan. And then the second way is to, how do you change the speed without changing the speed of the fan? Or how do you change the amount of wind without changing the speed of the fan? You keep the speed of the fan constant, the same, but you release E or you drop the CE from different distances away from the fan. All right, so this is the 2 ways which you can change the wind speed, by changing the speed of the fan or by dropping E from different distances away from the fan. So this one requires you to think, relate your daily experiences, because all of us know that when we stand very close to a fan, it is very strong. When we move further away, the amount of wind we feel is less. So it's a lot of daily experiences also. Okay, another one. Back to the previous example. So I didn't want to introduce a new question, otherwise I have to understand all over again. So suggest 2 changes to produce a louder ding sound. All of us know that it was the electromagnet that was attracting the hammer, and the hammer was striking the bell to produce the ding sound. So 2 ways to produce louder ding sound. I'm surprised because for that particular year, 2018, a lot of pupils forgot something. All right, very good. Thank you, Zekil. All right, so pupils have to recall concepts related to the strengths of electromagnets. So I'm actually referring to some of my GE pupils last time. They totally forgot that this has to do with increase the number of batteries as well as increase the number of wire coils. All right, it's not about stronger spring, Jinwei, is that so? Sorry, I'm using a very small screen, so I can't see the chat very well. I think it's Jinwei. Now, stronger spring has to do with the after opening the circuit, that has to do with part C. This one is part B, yeah? All right. So how do I increase the strength of an electromagnet? I will increase either the number of batteries that are connected in series, or I increase the number of wire coils around the iron cylinder. So this one, see, before that, the earlier question was about daily experiences. This one is about recalling something that you have learned. So you see all this information about number of batteries, number of wire coils was not in the actual question stem. All right, okay, so we have gone through more or less the types of questions that that are asked at PSLE. So some general observations of what some of the problems pupils face will be pupils lack in confidence. Very often in class, when I send out this thing called the board, where the pupils type their answers in response to a structured question, some people also write things like IDK or whatever, they just leave it blank. But they're very responsive when it comes to multiple choice. Okay, when it comes to structured questions, nobody wants to type, or not nobody, but a lot of them do not want to type. Now, many pupils like to focus on their strengths in multiple choice because it is very easy to get the marks in MCQ. You just take the right answer, you get 2 marks. And then Now, it's always better to focus on a weakness than to focus on a strength. Okay, strength is something that there's no need to really, we can, of course, fine tune the strengths, but we need to focus on whatever areas that we are weak in order to be more well-rounded. In this case, to focus more on structured questions. So if you're good at multiple choice, you need to focus on structured questions. Now, a lot of pupils put IDK, which means I don't know, because they think that they have no idea where this question is coming from. They've never learned this thing before. It's not possible. Everything that is asked has to come from something that pupils would have learned in primary school. Everything, not something, okay? Another problem is that pupils tend to use incorrect or miss out keywords. Incorrect keywords, for example, to describe the attractiveness of a flower, bright colored, large petals, what's the purpose? Some pupils write things like beautiful, okay? Beautiful is not a scientific word. It is a subjective word because we have no idea about the animal's sense of beauty. So because nobody ever interviewed the bee or the bird to ask whether they think that the flower is beautiful or not beautiful. But if we want to use the correct term, it will be attractive, right? So use the correct, and you don't say things like move the pollen grain, but correct words, transfer pollen grains, okay? Missing out keywords very important also. Especially when it talks about electrical circuit as well as water cycle. Remember the two examples that we went through earlier. Now, when you try to memorize information without understanding, sometimes, for instance, if you memorize the whole structure of water cycle, okay, water gain heat, evaporate, become water vapor lose heat to cooler surface and become water droplets. So you memorize the whole structure of the water cycle story. Then sometimes when they tweak the question, you are not able to adapt, and then you might lose marks because you have given too much information, or you have given information that is not relevant to what was being asked. So you need to read the question and know what is required. Okay. Repeating information that is given in the question, there is no marks for this. I'll just give you an example after this slide. And sometimes pupils in schools, now I don't blame the teachers want a complete, they want pupils to tie up the loose ends and write a final statement. Therefore, material P is the most suitable to keep hot food or something like that. Okay. Now, these closing statements, remember that this is a science paper. At primary level, it is not an argument. So we are just stating scientific observations, giving scientific explanation. So we don't have to state a final conclusion. Therefore, material B is the best, that kind of thing. Because it's already ascertained that material P, you already stated material P is the most suitable. So there's no need to end with a concluding statement. You can do so, but you're wasting time and there's no marks for that, okay? Now I'm going to give you an example. Okay, what I mentioned here, it gives a false sense of security. Okay, sometimes when there is a question and then perhaps there are 2 or 3 lines, when you repeat a lot of information from the question, it gives you or gives pupils the idea that, hey, I've written a lot and therefore I deserve the mark. But sometimes they miss out on the what is important, what should have given them the marks instead. All right. Okay, now I have an example here. I mentioned earlier that it appeared on the slides that very often the life cycle of mosquitoes are tested. Not too sure why, but I can think it is because of Singapore's ongoing battle with dengue fever, costing a lot of resources, a lot of lives as well. Okay, so 2018 was tested, 2020 was tested again. All right, now let's take a look at this answer. Okay, let me read to you first. Male mosquitoes do not bite. They do not spread dengue fever. When a male mosquito carrying bacteria W actually is in reference to Wolbachia, mates with a female mosquito, the eggs will not hatch. In 2019, male mosquitoes carrying bacteria W were released into some housing estates in Singapore. The number of dengue cases in these housing estates decreased after the release of these male mosquitoes, and explain why. All right, I'm not too sure if any one of you heard the news today. It appeared in the news today that there is the number of dengue cases this year compared to last year is halved. Okay, and they attribute it to the project Wolbachia, bacteria W. So this is a real situation, right? I heard it over the radio today. Now, can you take a look at the answer that I just typed? I showed you. Shown to you, and let me know what your thoughts are, and you might even want to give a mark. This is a 2-mark question. How many marks do you think this answer garners, or how many marks this answer deserves? Okay, you can just type a number in the chat. All right, I have half a mark, 1 mark. Okay, a lot, half, 2 halves, one is a 1 mark. Okay. All right, thank you, Denzel. Thank you, Carl. All right, the truth is that this this answer has no marks. Everything that is written there is what? Jinwei, 2 marks? No. You notice what I've highlighted? These are the exact information that is repeated in the answer. Right, the answer, the male mosquitoes carrying bacteria W, yes, were released. This is given to you. Did not bite. Yes, that is the first statement. When they mated with the female mosquitoes, the egg did not hatch. This is also repeated information. Thus, this is a conclusion. What I mentioned on the slide before this, when you make a closing statement, therefore, thus, hence, the number of dengue cases decreased after the release of male. Now, there's no mark to this. So this answer actually carries no marks, 0 marks, because everything here is repeated from the question itself. So 0. So zoom in directly to the what is necessary. So more eggs that the mosquitoes laid did not hatch. And because more eggs did not hatch, so there were fewer female mosquitoes to bite humans. So that is all. So this is interpreting, talking about the decreasing number of eggs that hatch and the decreasing number of female mosquitoes, and therefore the decreasing number of dengue cases. All right. So from 3 long sentences with no marks, we do have 2 sentences or 2 shorter sentences with full marks. Now, at this point in time, I would like to just caution you, when you buy the PSLE booklets, they do come with answer keys behind. Now, these answer keys are the interpretation of the publishers, right? They need not necessarily be correct. So a lot of these answer keys also include a final conclusive statement, right? Therefore, but that one is already a result that is given to us. So we can repeat that, but it's just not going to get any marks, okay? Now, I'll just share very quickly some general techniques in structuring response. First of all, identify a concept and then build your answer around the concept. For example, okay, make use of the words that have been given to you. Now, this example is, the concept is air occupies space. So we build around, so air occupies space is the skeleton, and then we throw in the meats, making use of information from the diagram. So air in the cup occupies space and stops water in the basin from entering. Okay, we don't know what the question is. I'm just giving an example. So the basic concept is there, and the highlighted words are words I pull out from the diagram. So I don't create or my own words. I don't have to introduce any new terms. Everything is there. Okay, make use of shorter sentences. Okay, this is an example from a real student. So if I type it out, he wrote, circuit B has a stronger pull than circuit A because B is a series. Now, if you interview this student, I actually interviewed this student to ask what did he mean, and he actually understood everything. He could answer every question, but sometimes students like to synthesize their answers. There's no need to join all our phrases into one complete answer. There's no need. You can just use short phrases. Okay, just move on. Now, one final note is doing pupils' reflections versus doing corrections. Now, in schools, enrichment centers and all that, we are required, or pupils are required to do corrections. And to a certain degree, it justifies that because purpose will be twofold. The first one is to, when the pupils write the answer many times, then they will remember better. So that is the idea behind that. And then when the pupil has written down the answer, he will have the recommended answer on file for his revision. All right. Now, reflection is something that is different. Okay. To reflect, the pupil compares his answer against the suggested answer and then comments on why his answer might not have been complete. So this brings the pupil to a higher cognitive level to move him from being someone who is being assessed to the role of an assessor. So if you do have time with, referring to parents here, with your child, you can try this. Okay, example, you could have the whole suggested answer there, and then the marks that, for example, for this question, the child got half out of 2 marks, and then the child reflects, why did I miss out this? Why did it get me half mark? So I missed out on, so the child highlights the word that he has missed, writes out what he's omitted, and in a way he's forced to be more analytical in the sense that now I need to be more aware that I tend to forget these words. And then when the same question is repeated, he has a better chance of getting it right. Okay, so this is reflection versus correction. Correction, the people just copy out everything without knowing where or why he is wrong. All right, I would ask if anyone has any questions at this point in time. Or you can use the chat, or you can speak. Right. Right. I slightly overran the time. I apologize for that. Okay, just very quickly, next 2 slides. Where Teacher Online can help is that you can make use of this email. I monitor this email, science@cher.com. Cher is spelled with R. So if you do attend, or your child does attend our lessons, you can clarify on our lessons. You can, if you're not too sure, even if you're not with TCher Online. If you're not sure with regards to whether an answer is correct or incorrect, you can always ask me. And if you have questions regarding the answer keys from other sources, you can also check with me. All right. What I have on the right side will be the SG Primary. So this is our partners. It is free. So what this app has done is to consolidate all the past year's questions from top schools into one website, and if pupils need more practice, you can just go there and assess the thousands of questions there for English, math, and science. Right? It's totally free. Right, a quick close to this. Next one. Now at TCher Online, our lessons are now TCher Online started beginning of last year, before the pandemic. So our lessons were different in the sense that it was written for the purpose of online engagement. We're not forced to go online because of the pandemic and all that. So the objectives were very different. Okay. Sorry, I'm just responding to the question. Now that email that science@tcher.com, you can always ask. It's not restricted to existing students. All right. So I'll try, and I am an educator. I'm not a business person. Yeah. So I will still, but if you are like giving me a lot of work, then of course I will. If like sending me your child's entire booklet B and ask me to analyze this, it will take a little bit of time. So just ask a few questions. I think that is fine. All right. Yeah, so cascading of PSLE skills, we make a lot of reference to the PSLE testing criteria. And for example, the new thing on hypothesis, we cascade that kind of information down to the P5s as well as the P4, so they learn it at a very early stage. We are very responsive to the PSLE questions. And the last point, I just zip through the rest. The last point, our lessons are all open door. It's not like when you drop a child off at a tuition center for 2 hours, and then you don't know what happens behind the closed door. Maybe for 1.5 hours, he's doing worksheet. And then for half an hour, the teacher goes through the worksheet. So here is different. All right. As in parents, you are welcome to sit in to the lessons. All right, I'm trying to open up a file here. Sorry, Leah, I'm not able to access that file. Right, TCher is actually, yes, a tuition enrichment center. So you can just visit our website and you can try out our lessons. The trials are all free. Sorry, Leah, I'm not able to download that particular file that you have shared. Would you like to email that image to me using that previous slide? All right, thank you, Leah. Sorry, yeah, it just states that a potential security threat has been detected, so I cannot download that file. All right, do I have questions? Yeah, all right, it's past 8 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining us, joining me. And I hope everyone has benefited to a certain extent to what was being shared. It's only 1 hour. I could only share that much. Of course, the general techniques, we do have more specific techniques. Hope to come online again when we can. All right. Thank you very much and have a very pleasant evening. All right. Goodbye and thank you.